Okay, here's the deal. If somebody is warning you about something that they themselves will do to you, that's not a warning. That's a threat. And it's been 10 years of, we all know this routine. We've seen this happen over and over and over again. So Jim is, if he's not obsessively searching his name, people are telling him, they're like, hey, Ramon Villalobos, he keeps bringing you up. He keeps bringing up that you haven't made a statement. Now, Jim is a husband, a father, and he's a teacher. He's been in comics for a couple decades. He knows how the industry works. He knows that if he ignores Ramon and doesn't do what Ramon wants, that Ramon will escalate. And eventually, probably the next step will be to contact the school to destroy his career. Jim has to support his family. Ed was, I would not say they were friends, but they were like creative brothers. They were creative partners. They didn't make comics together, but they created this thing, Cartoonist Kayfabe, which was huge and it was growing. It was at almost 100,000 subscribers. And so Ramon knew that the way to really just make Ed spiral was to get Jim to condemn him. So he kept bringing it up over and over. And as that woman said, like, you're not an investigator. You're not any kind of authority. What is it to you? They know how to inflict maximum damage. So he says, Jim really needlessly making himself complicit. Complicit. He's basically saying, we're about to make you an accomplice. So, you know what to do. So then Jim does this statement. In light of past week's shocking revelations, I find it necessary to reevaluate my professional associations to ensure they align with my values of respect and integrity. Therefore, I have ended my working relationship with Ed Piskor. I know what they're going to do. They're going to say, well, other people were doing the same thing. He's very proud of it. He knows that Jim either saw the tweets or the grapevine told him, hey, Ramon's on your case. He keeps bringing it up and he's calling you, he's saying you look like you are complicit in what Ed did. You're a teacher at a school. He knew what was the next step. He distanced himself from Ed professionally. Ed, in his suicide note, said that Jim visited him at his house. It wasn't clear if it was before or after this. I get the feeling it was after or the same day. Gave him a hug, and he basically said, Jim doesn't usually hug people, but he said he loves him, he's there for him, gave him a hug, visited him at his house. So I know a lot of people are really coming down on Jim. Actually, no, it's not a lot of people. I would say the majority of people are on his side, and they understand the terrible position he was put in by Ramon, where his ability to support his family, his main career as a teacher, was in danger. Because that's what they do. They never give up. There was this whole song and dance where they're like, well, all I did was do a Homer Simpson's gif after we heard the news. No, bitch. Alex, you have 10 fucking years of using social media as a torture chamber and a kangaroo court. Ed knew there was no road to atonement. No matter what he did for the rest of his fucking life, you would be there calling him a pedophile, even though Molly specifically said he was not a pedophile. So, this is 2 days after the news. So I believe Molly did like a statement like every 2 days. I couldn't find the first two statements. I'm sure they're still out there, but I read all three of her statements multiple times. So he says, and this link is dead. He says, Jesus Christ, Ed is such a fucking creep. Glad the victims of his behavior feel safe enough to come forward about this, despite some of the harassment I've already seen Ed Piskor's audience has already sent their way. And this is just evidence of he just had a beef with him. This is June of 2020. If I remember correctly, it was Molly D said they first started talking, I believe, July of 2020. So this is before even the time of the allegations. He just didn't like him. So he's like, come for Ed Piskor explaining clout chasing. Stay for Ed Piskor bragging about how he antagonized DMC by making him a racial caricature in Hip Hop Encyclopedia. Okay, first of all, it's called Hip Hop Family Tree. Everyone knows that, but they always do this little condescending bit where they're like obsessed with you, but they pretend to not know like the name of your book. They always do that with Ethan. They'll call his book Cyber Toad, just to be like, your little book. Like, he knows the name of the book. So if you actually watch the video, it's like a minute and change. I'm not gonna go through it. You can click on it. It's still there. He's not talking about DMC. He's talking about Russell Simmons. And what he said is he basically drew him really goofy to basically antagonize Russell Simmons, to say like, what's this white boy drawing me with a giant, gap in my teeth and wonky eyes? What the fuck? And like he said, he was what is it called? Cutting promos. He was basically antagonizing him. That is not a racial caricature. And so this is just evidence of Ramon being dishonest, trying to maximize damage, and just not liking him. If I were to hazard a guess, it was, and I'm watching Rob Liefeld's podcast from a couple days ago about Ed, and he just called it a decade of success. And that's what it was. I mean, Ed worked in comics like a decade before his decade of success, but it was just like Hip Hop Family Tree was a huge hit. I believe it got an Eisner. The mainstream media just loved it. What was that dancer woman? The hip hop heads, they loved it too. Like, it was just an across the board hit. Then he did WYSIWYG, which wasn't a massive financial hit, but it was very profitable. He talked about it a lot of times, and I think it was also nominated. Then he did X-Men Grand Design, which I remember liking at first, and by the end it was a huge chore, but very, very successful. Then he had been doing the cartoonist kayfabe for a few years, but it was really during COVID where it just exploded because people were stuck inside, and that's where like that it had been around for like a year and a half, 2 years by then, but it really exploded in popularity. So I think Ramon was just professionally jealous. So he would just, every time he could just zing, even if he had to lie to do it, he would do it. And he's just a mean person in general. Do you remember Glenn O'Leary? When he gives this completely just bland take. He's like, I don't like when writers, I'm kind of doing his accent, I don't like when writers want to write Spider-Man and they write themselves. They should write Peter Parker. I don't want to hear about you stupid shit. Like, it's not anything offensive. And then Ramon, who is morbidly obese, says, comic writers take note. This salami-breathed hog has some sage wisdom for all of you. And everyone was just like, what the fuck? Like, this is a retailer. Like, why are you... Okay, first of all, why are you body shaming him? Especially when you are yourself morbidly obese. And, like, it's just, like, the most mild comment. And it just basically came out a few years ago. Look, you're not allowed to criticize the mainstream industry in any way, shape, or form. If you do, we will reframe your criticisms no matter. I actually really enjoyed doing the Glenn voice. And they got these writers out here, and, like, they have a Peter Parker, and he doesn't sound like Peter Parker. He sounds like Zeb Wells. If I want to buy a Zeb Wells comic, just make a comic called The Amazing Zeb Wells, and then at least it's honest. That's gonna be. It's gonna be another channel. It's just me giving very bland opinions in Glenn O'Leary's voice. But it was like it's like that thing I said. Like, he's not even fun. He's just like mean. He just kind of just hates people. So this was from 2 years ago where they did a Red Room variant, and it was all like references to classic graphic novels. And then Jim did one for Mouse, and then you're not allowed to do that because that was about the Holocaust and that was insensitive. Ed just ignored it at the time. He put a little popcorn emoji because I think he knew that it would trigger some people. And then here's Ramon. Almost feel bad for Jim. Genuinely sweet guy in all interactions I've ever had with him. Piskor ducking accountability is not surprising. He seemed happy to share it. Even put a little popcorn emoji like he knew it would be a thing. This is like a whole nother video. I think I actually covered this back in the day. But Ramon and Tamara Bonvillain, who were the artists and colorists of Border Town, they did the same thing when there was a scandal with the writer Eric Esquivel. They just didn't say anything for several days. So Ramon castigating Jim for not giving a statement when he himself took several days to make a statement. And I thought I remembered Ramon saying this, but it was in this long thread where it was like him and Tamara. Tamara is, of course, more protected because Tamara is trans. So they basically said they knew Eric had these tendencies, but they thought he stopped because they asked him if he stopped, and he said yes. What the fuck? You're out there calling Jim complicit of something he clearly knew nothing about that happened years ago. But you yourself and Tamara admitted that you knew he had these tendencies. But you thought he stopped because you asked him and he said he stopped. But if he ever did it, then he should never work again, right? Because that's the metric you used with Ed, but it didn't apply to your friend, your former friend, Eric, even though you knew he did stuff like that beforehand. So he says, can't believe I have to explain this to guys like R. Kelly. So he's naming someone who's a pedophile against someone else to defame them. But this is not me making the Ed Piskor thing about me. This is about Ed Piskor fans making this about me. See the difference? I get brought up for no reason, but that's okay. The price of relevancy, I guess. No, you, every single time, you could twist the knife. In any occasion, going back to 2020, you have done so. You never, for a single second, showed any empathy for the actual alleged victim. And you, in fact, ignored her claims when they didn't fit your narrative. So again, this is 2022. This shit genuinely amused me. Piskor in absolute shambles right now. L+ ratio. He just didn't like the guy. Still can't believe this jabroni Ed Piskor talked crazy about Scott Williams, one of the tightest inkers ever, LOL. What's wrong with that little guy? Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure that guy was like 6'2". Also, we are going to see in his mulling statement he gave, where he claims that he knew all along that Ed Piskor was a predator. Okay, if you know someone in quotes, that someone is a predator, not liking Scott Williams' inking style is like the least worst thing you knew, quote unquote, him doing. Like, why would you mention this? It's like I always say, it's like someone describing John Wayne Gacy as a bad painter. So then he was referencing all the emotional turmoil he got from the cancellation of Border Town, and he says, but please understand, from my point of view, the whiplash of working on a book that was so personal to me in Border Town, that ended the way it did, to working on a book that could again make my career. There was a lot of depression involved, and it screwed me up. He's referencing where he got this gig to draw Wildcats, and then because he was still in a depressive, not episode, but like period of his life, because of what happened with Border Town, he just couldn't draw, and the book got put on hiatus and then permanently canceled. What bothers me is this is a guy who has a history with depression. So he is aware of the depths of depression and how difficult it is to crawl out of it, and he found a laser-focused way to make things much worse for Ed. This one I don't really get because he's referring to some podcasts. But again, this is from 2020. And it's just like Ramon using any excuse to zing Ed Piskor. So he had a tweet where he said, X-Men of Swords, more like X-Men off the chain, which I guess was like a reference to Ed because Ed has this like hip-hop persona he does. So then he says, first the Gutter Boys pod came for Ed Piskor, and that was okay because he's a fucking loser. But now this, when will it end? So he's just teasing him. He just doesn't like him. And, I mean, this barely makes any sense. So, somebody, when this first, the scandal, like a day later, they said, Villalobos has been on an anti-Ed tear for years, often reaching very far. But in this case, it seems to unfortunately not be a reach at all, backed by direct claims of a woman who felt predated upon with receipts. Yikes. So then Ramon says, more and more people are saying this. To be clear though, I've never reached. I've always been right. I looked into Ped Piskor's soul and saw a nasty little guy worthy of contempt. So now apparently he has the penance stare like Johnny Blaze. What the fuck is this? First of all, again, he's doing that little like cutesy pie way of talking on Twitter, but we're going to see a statement where he's like, oh, I always knew he did this stuff against women. No, you just didn't like anything he did. Most likely just professional jealousy. So here is his statement from the same day that Ed was murdered. The same day that Ed released his suicide note that described his death as a murder and listed Ramon as one of his murderers. So he says, been mulling over this all day, but understandably didn't want to say anything out of turn. This is how I feel. I don't even know what to say. My heart goes out to Ed Piskor's family and friends. This is not me being hypocritical or trying to backtrack on the posts I made that were critical of Piskor in the past. It is my belief that when you believe someone is a bad actor, you should call them out. The fact is, there were unsavory allegations about Ed Piskor that were preceded by rumors that he was unsafe and predatory to women in the comic scene. In his letter, Piskor said he was innocent and that there was missing context that, if shared, would exonerate him. I wish he would have made that case and acknowledged that his experience may not have aligned with the experiences of the women that spoke out against him. He could have acknowledged his faults and promised to do better, and I'm sure most people would have given him the opportunity to prove he was capable of growth. We'll never know, though, because Ed has chosen another route, and it is heartbreaking. I hate that this was the choice he made. Even though Piskor considered me part of a mob out to take away comics, the only thing he loved, that was obviously never my intention. My intention was to make that thing he loved accessible to women, who have far too often been victimized by men in this business. But my intention doesn't matter. He was clearly in a headspace where he felt like that was the case. But I can, from the bottom of my heart, say that I wish this wasn't how the story ended. His friends, family, and fans deserve to see him make an attempt to live up to the man they believed him to be. And because I can't forget how this all started, my heart goes out to all the women who shared the experiences that made them feel uncomfortable and unsafe in this space. They should get some peace and support from the community, but instead they got this. Their experiences still matter. So as I mentioned, my first video, because I said I wasn't going to make videos about this situation until after Ed's funeral, it was just 20 minutes of cursing, and all 20 minutes of cursing I believe you probably just did in your head while I was reading this absolute bullshit. Ramon hated Ed Piskor. We don't know why. I guess it's just professional animosity. I remember back during the days of Border Town, he was just always making these racial comments about white people, like over and over and over again. And then he was also claiming that he was repeatedly the victim of racism and that the comics industry was racist, but his career was like really good. And nobody thinks someone named Ramon Villalobos is Irish. He's very clearly Mexican American. So he was just like really mean. And if you read Border Town, go watch my reviews, go watch just some guys' reviews of that book. It was like proudly racist. It was probably the most racist thing I've ever seen published by any mainstream company. But he never wished anything but the worst fate imaginable for Ed. And when things were horrible, he said, I know how to make things worse. I'm going to keep saying that Jim needs to condemn him. Or he's complicit. He's a teacher. That'll destroy his entire career if he's seen as being complicit with a pedophile. Because that's what he was calling him. Piskor. Anyone who defended Ed, he started calling them like R. Kelly. Except for the woman, Molly Dwyer, specifically said Ed was not a pedophile. Said that he did not harm her. So you see him kind of reeling back to, he made them feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Here's the fucking deal about comic pros. All they do is gossip about each other all day long. You could literally make up a fictional comic book pro and spread rumors about them, and they would do so. You could just be at, what was the most recent convention? WonderCon? You could just sidle up to like Cully Hamner. It's like, did you hear what Mashed Potato Jones did at Emerald City Comic Con? I can't talk about it, but let's just say, hide your silverware when he's around. It's like, what, he steals silverware? No, it's what he does after with the silverware. What does he do? Shove it up people's butts? Like, and they always do this thing. It's like, oh, you better watch out for him. Oh, everybody knows about him. But you saw from the several years of him just zinging Ed whenever he could, there was not a slight hint that he was making women uncomfortable and unsafe. He just didn't like him. Most likely out of professional jealousy. They keep bringing up this phrase that he was a culture vulture. I only know that phrase from the first iteration of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. One of the guys with his like, one guy was like a chef, and then the other guy was like culture vulture. And I was like, what the fuck is that? It's like he just knows about trends. But apparently culture vulture now is describing someone who engages in cultural appropriation. So he didn't like that he had a hip-hop persona. He had like 3 personas. He dressed like a 1980s black rapper. He talked like a 1930s white gangster. But all of his analogies were based on wrestling, professional wrestling. So he was just like a weird guy who had like 3 different characters he was playing at the same time. Half of the shit that got him in trouble, I honestly think it was just him like, oh, what would my character say? Would my character say the bee's knees? No. My character would make fun of people who said the bee's knees. In fact, and I'll probably cover this in depth later, one of the things that got him in trouble is he said to Molly, he's like, can you keep a secret? Do you want to be my partner in crime? And it's like, oh shit, that sounds weird. It's like, you're not going to tell about anything I do with you. But then, before he shut down his website, on one of the pages, he had a list of people that he collaborated with, went to cons with, shared booths with. You know what the description of them was? Partners in crime. It was that weird 1930s gangster slang that he would use. He didn't pick your name out of a Kangol hat, Ramon. You have 10 years of participating in every single digital lynch mob. You have about 5 years of going after Ed for like the slightest thing. You have purposely misconstrued what he said to make him look racist. You call him a pedophile, and then after his death, you reel that back to just, he made people feel uncomfortable. You know who else makes people feel uncomfortable? You, Ramon. You and Alex DeCampi and Daryl Ao, you have for about 10 years used social media, Twitter specifically, as a torture chamber and a kangaroo court. This part about, like, I'm sure most people would have given him the opportunity to prove he was capable of growth. Most people would have. You wouldn't. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if he would have died of old age 45 years from now and you were still alive, you would have been calling him a pedophile. That's what you would have done. He knew there was no path to atonement or forgiveness, so he said to himself, how can I limit the pain? I can limit the pain by not being alive. And the absolute heartbreak in his suicide note, when he mentions the statement that you pushed Jim to give, I think most people would consider that the contributing factor to his death. Thanks for watching. Bye.